the Cleats First, Logic Second football podcast with your hosts Alexander Lauber and Phil Almodovar.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of the Cleats First, Logic Second football podcast. Phil, last week went better than expected. Thankfully, no more technical difficulties last week, and here we are for episode 2.
Yep, I had my coffee, had my chicken nuggets, and I'm ready to talk MLS.
So yeah, let's jump straight into the playoff recap and finals preview. Why don't we start with recapping what went down? So we'll start it off with the play-in round. First match that we'll look at, New England Revolution versus Montreal Impact. New England won that game 2-1. Phil, what are your thoughts on Montreal's season? They came into the play-in as the 9 seed in the East, obviously falling short in that match.
Yep, and it was an interesting matchup there between Thierry Henry's led Montreal Impact and Bruce Arenas' led New England Revolution. And of course, Montreal ended up losing that game against what would become a quickly surging New England Revolution. But we'll get into that, of course. Montreal Impact. I don't know, Alex. I expected more from Montreal Impact when you have quality players as Romel Kyoto and Safir Taider in the squad who performed really well during the regular season under a manager like Henry, who has managerial experience in Europe. You would expect them maybe to get a little farther than the play-in round. I saw this as just a little bit underwhelming for Montreal. We'll see if they could pick up the pieces in the offseason, but underwhelming for me.
No, yeah, I agree. It was an underwhelming season. You know, there were times that they looked good, and there were times that they looked not so great. I mean, they had a pretty, mediocre showing, even in the Canadian leg of the restart when there was them, Montreal and Toronto playing each other several times over. It'll be interesting to see if they can pick up the pieces there and how they can move forward. But like you said, I think it's going to be, an off season for Thierry Henry and them to do some reflecting, see ways that they can improve the team and see ways that they can move forward. So on from that, our other play-in match was 7th seed Nashville beating Inter Miami 3-0. Phil, what are your thoughts on Inter Miami coming off of their first season?
Well, anytime that an expansion team makes the playoffs in their first season, regardless of being an expanded field, it should be praised. I mean, you would expect greatness from a Beckham-led squad, but in your first season making the playoffs, that's always a good thing, whether that be the play-in round. They did lose to Nashville, who are also an expansion club, but they do have some good players in the squad, Blaise Matuidi and Luis Robles being 2, and I could see them starting to try to build on that and get a little better next season. Of course, they ran into a stout defensive club in Nashville who they just weren't able to beat in any way, shape, or form. I still think it was a solid season for Vice City.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think having players like Matuidi, like Higuain coming straight from Juve over here, there was a higher level of expectation and they did fall short of it. But, I mean, as we'll see, losing to Nashville and losing without scoring a goal to Nashville isn't anything to be that unexpected. I think there's definitely building blocks, like you said, to build upon. But it'll be interesting to see how they move forward from here. So on from that, we go to the round 1 of the playoffs. And the first match we'll look at was Columbus Crew versus New York Red Bulls. 3-seed Columbus beat the Red Bulls 3-2. Phil, what are your thoughts on the Red Bull season?
Now, let me ask a preliminary question to all those other Red Bulls fans watching this podcast. Did you really expect this season's New York Red Bulls to make the playoffs in the first place? Even after Armas was fired, after losing 4 straight matches, the Red Bulls still made the playoffs, which is something you really don't see. You don't really see in the sport of football a club making it too far after firing their head coach mid-season, yet the Red Bulls were able to scratch across, get to a playoff spot, and play the Columbus Crew, who are miles ahead of them class-wise, pretty well. I think it was a good season for the Red Bulls, really looking at what they had to use, had at their disposal. Caden Clark and Brian White both emerging as young offensive pieces to build around. There is a long way to go for the Red Bulls to go back to being title contenders, but being in this stage of a rebuild already, it seems things are looking up.
Yeah, definitely interesting to see where they go from here. And like you said, big first steps in rebuilding. It will be interesting to see how they can further that next season and in the coming off season. So from there, we move to the next round 1 matchup between Orlando City and NYCFC. The game ended 1-1. However, Orlando advanced on PKs 6-5. Phil, what are your thoughts on NYCFC's season?
If you did not watch this match, I feel sorry for you, because this match is going to be remembered in MLS playoff folklore for a long time. NYCFC going into this were labeled as cup contenders. They had the squad to do it. Great young pieces, surrounded by veterans who had a lot of experience both in MLS and abroad, playing together. It looked like it was in the cards, but then they ran into an Orlando City FC team that just seemingly cheated death multiple times in this match to find a way to win. Alex, they had 2 red cards shown to them in this match, one in extra time and another during penalties for their goalkeeper coming off the line trying to make a save. You can't do that in soccer, and he was shown a red card. They had to put a midfielder in at goalie for the rest of the penalty shootout, and he made the game-winning save. This is an atrocity if you're a New York City fan. Not only to know that you lost to an Orlando City team, that's pretty solid, but you lost in the worst possible way. They were down 2 men. They had a player who had never played goalie probably in his life in net for the remainder of penalty shootout, and you lose to them. And now you have a few of your young pieces, the most notable being fullback and Long Island native, going to Borussia Mönchengladbach in the summer. Best of luck to him. And now you're starting to say to yourself, how does this team recover from this?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how NYCFC can move on and, with the other things that have transpired with the club, it'll really be a crucial turning point to see how they can grow, change, not only as, players on the field, but as an organization as a whole and move forward. I think something that we did forget about that I'll jump back and we'll retroactively give grades to the other teams. You've also assigned grades for the season to these teams. So why don't we start with NYCFC? Tell us your grade after that whole recap.
Yes, I had assigned season grades to each team, and I gave NYCFC an F. And I gave NYCFC an F not only because they went out the way they did, they were labeled as cup contenders, but also just because there's a lot of uncertainty going into next season in terms of who's coming back and who will be leaving. And if players who are rumored to leave, and there are already players who are stated as leaving, who have already signed contracts with other clubs, they could be in trouble.
So from there, let's jump back again. New York Red Bulls, what would you give their season?
I gave the New York Red Bulls an A-. And like I said before, they're not there yet in their rebuild, but they have progressed a lot farther than I think a lot of people expected them to. They have young pieces that they could build around in Caden Clark and Brian White. Also, Kyle Duncan has maturing to do in the back line. So if they are able to grab a class goalkeeper, Ryan Mira is not the answer there. They could end up emerging as a solid playoff team.
And then before them, Inter Miami, what would you give them?
I gave Inter Miami a B+, and just because it's a great start for a Beckham-led team, it's a great start for them. They have some solid players there. It's just about building around them.
And then Montreal Impact?
Montreal, I gave a C, and here's why. Like I said, underwhelming season. You wasted a year from El Kyoto and Ty Dare playing together, so Thierry Henry is going to have a lot of work to do to turn that around.
So that's it for our retrospective grades. Now we'll move on to the next first round matchup, which was Minnesota versus Colorado. Minnesota coming in as a 4 seed and Colorado coming in as a 5th seed. They lost that first round matchup 3-0. Phil, well, let's start first off with Colorado's grade for the season, and then you can break down the performance and break down how you thought their season went overall. So what grade did you give Colorado?
Despite losing 3-0, I gave Colorado a B season grade, and this is why. Colorado, if you look at this game from purely a scoreline perspective, you could say, well, they got beaten bad by Minnesota. But if you actually watch the match, and even if you look past the scoreline, you could see that the scoreline did not exactly show how close this match really was. Colorado had about the same number of scoring chances as Minnesota did. Colorado had just as much possession as Minnesota did. They even completed more passes. It's just the fact that they could not put the ball into the back of the net when they needed to. They couldn't finish. And if you can't finish against a Minnesota team, as we saw throughout the rest of the playoffs, you're not going to win against them. And unfortunately for Colorado, this is just an unlucky result. And going into next season, Colorado does have a dynamic young duo, Cole Bassett and Jonathan Lewis. If both do stay up in that attack, Colorado can progress in these playoffs come next season.
Yeah, like you said, I think with that duo and being able to build the team around them, it'll be interesting to see where they can go. So the next matchup that we saw was Sporting Kansas City, the 1 seed, coming in and facing off against 8 seed San Jose. The game ended a 3-3 draw. However, Sporting Kansas City went through on PKs 3-0. Phil, how do you think San Jose did this season?
I mean, despite the loss, you got to give San Jose Earthquakes an A+ for this season. Look at where they are. Take a moment for me, go online, go onto Google and search up San Jose Earthquakes, 5 games left in the 2020 MLS season. And just look where they were. And tell me that you would think that they would be an MLS playoff contender. You can't. They were so far out of it. They seemingly had to win just about every match just to get into the MLS playoffs. Had tough matches coming up against Real Salt Lake and LAFC going down the stretch of the MLS season. They had to win both to get in. You didn't think with what they had that they'd do it. Well, guess what? They beat both. They went on an improbable run and made it into the MLS playoffs, playing against the number 1 seed in the West, Sporting Kansas City, who pretty much looked unbeatable after a great regular season. Now, going into the game, I think a lot of us expected a rout. Well, that didn't happen. Chris Wondolowski decided to channel his inner Landon Donovan, and in the 7th minute of stoppage time, scored a glorious equalizer to send this game hurling into extra time, in which, of course, the game was still a stalemate and went to penalties. Unfortunately, the Cinderella team in the San Jose Earthquakes could not pull out the result in penalties. But all in all, it's a win for a team that has been down in the table for year upon year upon year now, starting to make that climb up. The big question is going to be, well, Chris Wondolowski is starting to really get old now. How much does he have left? Is he trying to be the Americans' Zlatan Ibrahimovic? And can San Jose actually put solid young pieces around him to make this team a playoff contender again?
Yeah, no, like you said, credit where credit's due. It'll be interesting to see if they can carry that form over to next season. But from there, we move on to the next round one matchup, where we saw the Portland Timbers go down to FC Dallas 8-7 in penalty kicks after ending the game 1-1. Phil, thoughts on Portland's season?
I gave Portland Timbers a D- for this season. And if you were watching the game, if you didn't watch the game, Portland Timbers 1-1 going into penalty kicks. 7-7 in penalty kicks. You have the player that scored for you in regulation stepping up to give you an advantage in penalties, likely the win against FC Dallas, who were punching well above their weight to still be in this against you. And of course, he misses. Now, Portland Timbers, unfortunately, this could be the sign of a decline. The core is melting away. Players that were key back in the glory days of Portland when they were winning MLS Cup are gone. Darlington Nagbe is gone. Other players around that were around him are also gone. You have players like Diego Valeri who are still in the squad starting to fade in terms of form, and it's not looking good for Portland. I could see this team dropping out of the playoff race next season.
From there, let's move on to Toronto FC versus FC Nashville, something that hits close to home. Nashville, the 7th ranked team, beat the 2nd ranked team in Toronto FC 1-0, and that result ended in extra time. Phil, what were your thoughts on TFC's season?
I know you'll have your own opinions on Toronto FC being a TFC supporter, Alex. I'm going to try my best to give a non-biased review here that I hope all Toronto FC fans could empathize with me about here. I gave Toronto FC a C, and I gave them a C because I give them the benefit of the doubt here. Yeah, you lost to Nashville. I don't think TFC fans expected to lose to Nashville in this playoffs if they were going to be knocked out. But here's how I look at it. You're playing against the best defense in MLS. Yep, the best defense in MLS, at least in my opinion, this season. That's not going to be an easy task. This team just shut down Inter Miami, who have Gonzalo Higuain and Blaise Matuidi in the lineup. It was not going to be an easy task for Toronto FC to break them down, and we saw that in this match. We saw a Pozzuelo that, despite winning the MVP of MLS, that was just announced this week. Congratulations to Pozzuelo. It is well deserved. You really started to see that he's human in this match. And that's okay, because he played really well all regular season long and had this trip up in the playoffs. He struggled. He couldn't find that creativity that he had in the regular season, and that's going to happen with every star player, from your Messis to Ronaldos to Kevin De Bruyne's. It's going to happen. And unfortunately, it happened in this position for him. Next season, there could very easily be a renaissance in Toronto FC. Of course, manager resigning. There will be a little bit of a shakeup, I feel. I hope this leads to Toronto FC grabbing a couple more pieces that they need in defense, as well as starting to transition Josie Altidore out and Ayo Akinola. Really a great talent at striker, 20 years of age, in for Toronto. Things could go very bad for Toronto after this, but things can also go very well. I think this could be a good wake-up point to say, hey, Pozzuelo can't do this on his own. We need to help him out. We need to rebuild this squad around him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you with a C. it's disappointing with the potential in the squad to see that things have progressed this season as they did. I mean, honestly, there have been, for as much good as there was this season, there was a lot of disappointing. Like you said, I think Josie Altidore and Michael Bradley are both getting to the point where it seems, there's questions of how much gas they have left in the tank. It'll be interesting to see how, the Greg Vanney situation, now that he's stepped out and he's decided to, walk away, or not walk away, but, leave the team. It'll be interesting to see how they fill that vacancy. I think, we're in the midst of a rebuild. It'll be interesting to see, what they do, who they bring in. I think, but, at the same time, there are the really good signs of, players like Achara, Akinola, Richie Larea, who all had great seasons. Achara's cut short, I believe. I forget with what specifically, but due to injury. There's a lot of potential there, and it'll be interesting to see. These are the crucial stages on how they move forward and, whether they remain in the title picture and as a top team, or if they start to fizzle out. So on to, as much as that was, a surprising result because of who went out, not surprising, again, I agree with you with Nashville's defense. Let's talk about the real upset of round one of the playoffs in Philadelphia, top team in the MLS, and Community Shield winners going down 2-0 to New England Revolution. Phil, what happened with Philadelphia?
If you didn't believe it beforehand, the Community Shield, the curse of the Community Shield is very much a real one. As a Red Bulls fan, I know this, and now Philadelphia Union know as well. They had the pieces. They had the core. They had Brendan Aronson, a young star in the center midfield. They had quite possibly the best goalkeeper in MLS in Blake in between the pipes. He had an incredible season. Alejandro Bedoya playing his butt off to finally get himself an MLS Cup. They had all the pieces practically in place, and they ran into a red hot New England Revolution team. And they were not prepared. They were not fluid. Their game did not flow. They did not have creativity, and it showed. New England Revolution took advantage, and they took advantage fast. This team, the Philadelphia Union, from 20 minutes in, I think, from watching the game, looked beaten. They looked defeated. And this just goes to show that having the best record in MLS come the regular season means nothing come the playoffs. You have to go in ready because there are going to be other clubs just as hungry, if not hungrier than you are. And this is a lesson for Philadelphia Union because now the core is starting to break off. Brendan Aaronson's going to Salzburg in January. He's not going to be there anymore. He was the centerpiece of that offense. Now what are you going to do? That's why I gave this team a season grade of an F. They had it all together and seemingly in the span of one match lost it.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I mean, that is the double-edged sword of a league that plays a regular season and then has a playoffs. And I mean, Zlatan came out, I think, fairly recently to criticize that format. Again, good points, but definitely disappointing to see how things ended up for them. And like you said, with a lot of questions in the future, definitely a huge letdown. So from there, let's move on to the final match of round one, LAFC versus Seattle Sounders. Seattle powering through that, winning 3-1. Phil, what are your thoughts on LAFC's season?
I gave LAFC, pardon me, a B-, and this is why. LAFC, a lot of people, if you just watched this match, didn't really pay attention to MLS. You thought, wow, this team's supposed to be good. What happened? Well, they still had Carlos Vela in the lineup, possibly one of the best attackers still in MLS, but they were without Diego Rossi, Diego Palacios, Jose Cifuentes, all due to injuries and COVID-19 reasons. Those are 3 key players in that squad. And Diego Rossi was the MLS Golden Boot winner. He scored the most goals in the MLS in the regular season. If you're without your leading goal scorer, it's going to be an uphill battle. And it showed. Seattle Sounders took advantage. They won the game. And it's not like LAFC didn't fight, didn't have any bite. They still kept it virtually close. But I think if you ask any LAFC fan watching throughout the season and ask them without those players if they had a chance against Seattle Sounders, I think all of them would have said no. Because if you're without 3 of the cornerstones of your roster, you're not going to have much of a chance in the playoffs. And that's what happened. And going into next season, I think if all 3 return, it's going to be a much different story.
So on from there, we'll move on to the conference semifinals. First match, I should say. We saw New England Revolution take on Orlando City. The Revolution continuing to power through, overcoming Orlando 3-1. Phil, what happened with Orlando, and what are your thoughts on the season there?
So Orlando FC could not get out of their own way. We saw it against NYCFC, 2 red cards, tons of mistakes, got lucky, were able to somehow win that match and go through, but that was not the case against New England. You make mistakes against a team that's led by Bruce Arenas, and you're going to be punished for it. That's just how it is. And Orlando City made too many mistakes. If you watch this game, they were losing possession in key areas. They were not backtracking the way that they should have. And New England Revolution punished them for it. I still give Orlando City a B+ for the season and the fact that they were still able to make it farther than at least I thought they would have in these playoffs. But you expected a little bit more of them in terms of just discipline. And going into next season with Nani turning, I believe, 34, it's a question of how much do some of these key players on Orlando City have left in the tank.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's going to be interesting to see, with a big player like Nani getting up there in age. It'll be interesting to see how they progress. I was going to say, I let you finish there, but we're week 2 of the podcast and you already want to switch from football to basketball?
Whoops.
Mentioning Gilbert Arenas, but no, all kidding aside, let's move on to the next matchup in the East, where we saw Columbus Crew take on Nashville. Columbus beating Nashville 2-0. Phil, in their first season in the MLS, what are your thoughts on Nashville SC?
Oh man, Nashville, A+. What a season. I mean, that defense is just something else. Walker Zimmerman and David Romney. I mean, if you ask most, even MLS, the most stingent MLS supporters, and you ask them what the best center back pairing in the MLS this season would be, I don't think many of them would have said Walker Zimmerman and David Romney, but wow, they partnered together perfectly. This back line was solid. This team was just tough to break down. Clean sheet against Inter Miami. Clean sheet against Toronto FC. 2 pretty solid offensive teams. Then they shut down Columbus Crew for 90 minutes. 0 goals. Columbus Crew, of course, scoring twice in extra time to win that match. Nashville just ran out of gas. It's as simple as that. They ran out of gas. You playing 2 extra time games in the playoffs back to back, that's tough. Especially when it's been as hard for them as it has been to put the ball in the back of the net against some of these better squads. And the problem that they need to address is pretty clear. It's the attack. They didn't score against Toronto FC until extra time. They didn't score at all against Columbus Crew. Mukhtar and the men up there with him are not the answer there. They need some new forwards. Preferably maybe some young talent Maybe go to Europe, see if you could find anything of use there. But Nashville are on the right path right out of the gates. It's exciting.
Yeah, like you said, definitely an unexpectedly good season for them. Again, yeah, credit there with their center backs, with that defensive prowess that they've shown. It'll be interesting to see how they move forward. Like you said, I think, yeah, going out and being able to acquire some big, young player, even if it is on loan, that would definitely be a huge help to them. And, if they can get their offense sorted, it'll be scary to see how Nashville can play next season and how they can carry that over. On to the West. First matchup that we'll look at, Seattle Sounders versus FC Dallas. Seattle beating Dallas 1-0. Phil, what are your thoughts on Dallas's season?
I mean, I could be wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but FC Dallas is starting to seem like a New York Red Bulls team of past where they seemingly make the playoffs every year have a strong squad, just can't finish. They just can't finish it off. I mean, they ran into Seattle Sounders. Obviously, that's going to be a tough game to win. We're unable to put in a goal in that match. With the team they have right now, I would give that squad a B+. I mean, it's FC Dallas. It's a team that you see in the playoffs just about every year. It's a team that you'll see win a matchup or two in the playoffs and then go out a little ways in. They had a great match against Portland Timbers. Could they have been playing in over their head? Sure, but they still won that match. It was a really good win for them. There are a lot of questions in the offseason. A lot of their star performers are aging, getting above that age of 30, which in football, you start to see players regress. Ryan Hollingshed and Fabrice Picot being two of them. And of course, if they want to continue to be competitive, I think you're going to have to start seeing players like Tanner Tessman, younger players in the squad, start to step up.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't think that there's really any shame in going down to Seattle, and we'll get to them shortly. But like you said, yeah, you go in with, or you always have a decent, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're the flashiest squad. I wouldn't say that they're the most out there squad, especially in the West. But like you said, it's disappointing to see them always fall short. From there, let's move on to, speaking of falling short, number 1 seed Sporting Kansas City going down to Minnesota 3-0. Phil, what happened with Sporting Kansas City?
I mean, this is even more embarrassing, arguably, than Philadelphia Union's loss. I mean, come on. You're going against the Minnesota team that has been in the MLS for what, 3 years now? And that's just starting to get it together. And you have a squad already built up with a really nice mix of veterans and exciting young players. Of course, the main one being Gianluca Busio, who's emerging as a young star. And I don't know what came over them. They just seemingly forgot how to play the game of football. I think that's plain and simple. This Minnesota team were their dynamic, creative, clinical selves, and there was nothing Sporting Kansas City can do about it. They were beaten in every facet of the game, plain and simple. They were dominated offensively, defensively, by the goalkeeper. Every single aspect of that game, Sporting Kansas City lost. And that's inexcusable for a team that was labeled as an MLS Cup contender, if not favorites, to win the MLS Cup after Philadelphia Union got eliminated. So, a clear MLS Cup winner losing when they lost, how they lost, is just an awful, awful end to the season, and it could shape the future. Players could end up leaving. We'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting off season. We'll see what Busio does. We'll see what other key players in the squad like Kiri Shelton and Johnny Russell both do. It's going to be dependent on them to see if they're competitive next season.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, it should be said, while they had a disappointing season, I don't think anything should be taken away from that Minnesota side, because they've been rightfully very, very, very impressive in their play. we'll get to their big letdown, but like you said, I think it's time for Sporting Kansas City to reevaluate, like the other big clubs who bounced fairly early out of the tournament, be able to see how to move forward and how to not drop the ball like that moving forward. On to the conference finals. While we're there, I know that we've been going in order of the games being played. Since we mentioned Minnesota, let's start on the west side, conference finals. Minnesota versus Seattle Sounders. Seattle seemingly out of the game, coming back last minute and scoring a winner in the last minute of added time to pull a 3-2 victory and pull the carpet out of Minnesota after this, what really was a Cinderella season. Phil, what are your thoughts on Minnesota's year?
I love how this Minnesota United team played throughout the year and how they keep on seemingly each year since their inception, keep on getting better. This squad has been built perfectly. Solid defense, solid offense. I mean, even with a team with Kevin Molino up the top, coach and manager Adrian Heath still said that his defenders were the best part of his team. And they are not exactly household names. But all credit to Adrian Heath to making a dynamic, creative, clinical team that takes advantage of other teams' shortcomings, other teams' mistakes. The reason they were winning these games is they were playing towards other teams' weaknesses. They did it against Kansas City, and you saw it in the first half for 60 minutes against Seattle. This Seattle team didn't have answers throughout the first half of the game to what Minnesota was bringing to the table. Minnesota was dominating this game. And all that could really be an explanation of what happened that Seattle were able to get back into it was that Minnesota just flat out ran out of gas. And Adrian Heath noticed, and his only answer was, hey, let's slam on the brakes. That's seemingly the only thing we can do. We're not as dynamic going forward. It seems like players are starting to get tired. This is a Seattle team that is very tough to beat in Seattle. We're going to need to slam on the brakes, and it didn't work. But all props to this Minnesota team, and all props to what they were able to do this season. I give them an A+ for the season. I think they are going to be a force next year.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's a shame to see what happened. But, it's another learning point, and it's another way for them to move forward. Very impressive year. It'll be interesting to see how they progress. But, not surprising to see Seattle move on to the MLS Cup Finals. On the other side, in the Eastern Conference Finals, Columbus Crew, New England Revolution. Columbus comes through 1-0. Phil, what are your thoughts on New England coming to a screeching halt after firing on all cylinders out of the first two rounds and out of the play-in round?
Yeah, I thought for sure that Seattle Sounders would be at least contending in MLS Cup, if not winners of MLS Cup, after they beat Philadelphia Union the way they did. Bruce Arenas knows how to coach a team in the playoffs, knows how to put a team together. They had a great team full of some nice veterans and young players. Were they playing a bit over their heads? Were they overproducing? Maybe. But they were red hot. Montreal Impact beat them. Philadelphia Union beat them. Now you go to Columbus Crew saying, okay, this is a team that's very beatable as well. New York Red Bulls came close, and the Red Bulls aren't a really great team this season. We could beat them. And, it's just another case of a team running out of gas. Gustavo Bo did not have the same game that he had against Philadelphia Union as he had against Columbus Crew. Columbus took advantage. They knew exactly what they had to do, and they did it. All credit to Jesse Zardes and Darlington Nagbe leading this team to a great victory. But I think this is an interesting New England Revolution team. I'm going to give them a B in the fact that will this team be the same next year with some of their stars aging, I should say. I'm sorry. Buchanan, a very interesting young player, the Canadian winger. We'll see if he stays and what he's able to do next season. He's had some issues with consistency over this season. We'll see if he's able to bring more to the table next season, but overall, red hot team that ran out of gas. We'll see what they could do next season.
That's for sure. So that leads us to our final. December the 12th, we will be seeing Seattle Sounders take on Columbus Crew. Seattle, no strangers in recent years to playing in the finals, as much as it pains me to say, being that, TFC has developed this rivalry, both of them being regulars in that picture in the last couple of years. Columbus Crew themselves, this isn't their first rodeo. They won the MLS Cup in 2008, but their first time really back in this picture. Both sides, strong teams. Seattle, we know the resiliency and the grit that they can show, the bite that they can pack. They show it against Minnesota. They're a team that can never be counted out. Columbus Crew being a more, I'd say well-rounded team. Something from top to bottom. Very strong, hard to break down overall. Phil, how do you see this final playing out?
I mean, this is a very interesting matchup. Two teams that we're used to seeing in the final, seeing towards the end of the MLS playoffs in Seattle Sounders and Columbus Crew. Throughout all the craziness, we end up with these two clubs. Seattle Sounders, in my opinion, deserve to be here. Nicholas Lodeiro, Rui Diaz, a lot of players who have had a solid season playing straight through the playoffs, in form, grit, determination. Rui Diaz turning into a late match scoring artist, it seems. And a Columbus Crew team that, it's interesting. You could say that they've had a very weak path to the MLS Cup in terms of who they had to face. They faced a New York Red Bulls team that, like I said, possibly it could be argued that they weren't meant to be there. You could then say they faced a New England Revolution team that just hit a great run of form and were taken out of it right when they played against Columbus. So you could say what you want about Columbus's road here. They definitely deserve to be here, however, with the squad they've boasted. And I think the key to Columbus Crew is Jesse Zardes hitting the run of form that he has hit in these playoffs. He's playing like Jesse Zardes should be playing. The finishing that for so many years analysts have said is just not there when it's meant to be there. Jesse Zardes could be such this dynamic player if his finishing was a lot better. Well, guess what? It has came these playoffs. He is putting away his chances when he needs to. And if he can against Seattle Sounders, he can make this an interesting game. However, I don't see Columbus winning this match. I'm going to say Seattle wins this match 2-1.
Yeah, I think that's, a fair point that you've made. I'm going to... Where do I see this match going? I'm going to go the other way around. I think Seattle did show weakness in that game against Minnesota. I think Columbus has been, they have enough experience in the league. They have enough experience with the group that they're playing with that they can pick up on that. I still think, like you said, it's going to be a really tight matchup, but I'm going to go the same score flipped around. I think Columbus Crew will get it done and they'll win 2-1. So that rounds out our MLS Cup previews. We'll see. We'll be tuning in Saturday, seeing how things go, seeing how our predictions fare in that matchup, who will win the MLS Cup. So from there, let's move on to this week in news. And coming out of the world of football, both in North America and in England specifically, very interesting talking points that will change the landscape of, well, one, the game in England, and one that will change potentially the landscape of women's football in regards to their fight to remove the wide gender pay gap. We'll get more to that in a second, but let's start off with the Brexit FA transfer rule changes. I'll dive into that just a little bit. So, one of the biggest things to come out of this are that all signings from Europe need to qualify, or not just Europe, but in general have to qualify for a governing body endorsement. And what essentially that means is the players are being judged on a certain number of criteria, including international experience, league, and team that player is coming from, the minutes that they've played in continental competition, and the successes of their prior club. So based off of that, they're being given scores. They need to hit a score of 15 for the signing to be approved for a work permit. Otherwise, they will not be granted a permit and they are not allowed to come play in England. Now, what should be said, most European players won't be constricted in their moves. Internationals who regularly feature in a top 50 ranked nation squad will be given an automatic pass, so they'll be allowed to transfer right away. Any player from a Band 1 league, so namely the other Big Five, Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A, and Ligue 1, will be essentially on the verge of qualifying for those with enough points. Now, if a player does hit between 10 and 14 points, so they're on the border, their case can be heard by an exceptional panel, which are 3 independent individuals who will deem if they are facing exceptional circumstances which would prevent the player from hitting the 15-point mark, and if they deem that that's the case, they'll allow this the transfer to go through. So that's it for regular players. No U18 players are allowed to be bought from outside of the UK. That's a huge that holds big ramifications, Phil.
Yeah, of course. And that could be a big time rules change. No players under the age of 18 from outside the UK coming into the league. That could be detrimental for some teams having some interest in bringing in some youth stars from other countries. Could be a big downside.
Yeah, and we'll see. We'll get to the rule on the U21 rule change, but yeah, there's definitely, it seems that they're trying to push towards encouraging homegrown players and encouraging, grassroots within these big clubs. When it comes to U21 players, Premier League sides are only allowed to sign 6 U21s per season with a limit of 3 in this upcoming January transfer window. EFL clubs, it should be said, are not confined to this rule. Now, these U21 players will have a different criteria for grading, with the majority of the focus being put on their caliber and their pedigree. So it'll be interesting to see with this rule if development pushes towards EFL clubs buying in these younger players, so under the age of 21, but between 18 and 21, and seeing if that's how these teams are going to move forward with their development. We'll get to the next, I guess, or my speculation on it shortly, but something that should be said too, this rule change does affect managers who, with their staff, have to hit a certain criteria, again, to receive this GBE. These overseas managers need to hold a UEFA professional license, and on top of that, have to have managed in a so-called top league for 3 years total or 2 years consecutive. This list of quote-unquote top leagues does include 33. However, something, that would be interesting to say, this does limit opportunities for first-time managers and high-profile former players. So, for example, Xavi would not fit into this criteria, even though he's coaching in, where is it? I'm blanking off the top of my head.
I could not tell you.
Well, there you go. Now on this point, teams can appeal to the independent panel for £5,000, but need to show their appointment would, quote, contribute significantly to the development of the game at the top level in England, and they'd be bringing in a manager of the highest caliber. Now, like I said, I suppose it's a way to encourage emphasis on the development of homegrown players, but I feel like all English teams would suffer to a degree.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how these rules impact English clubs, especially with managers just coming in. We're going to see manager landscapes possibly changing with managers not doing as well. We could see it with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer being on the hot seat for a while, Mikel Arteta taking up the hot seat quite possibly. So we'll see how it goes.
And then, yeah, I think, too, it's really exposed and, has led to teams exploring workarounds. So, we've traditionally seen these teams, some in the Premier League and some outside, who tend to buy young players for low, and sell them for high. And to foreshadow a future episode, we'll be talking about that, and we'll be taking an in-depth look at the teams who are most proficient at that. But, we're going to start seeing connections and agreements being formed with either overseas teams or other European teams to develop these players. I mean, for example, City Football Group, who own Manchester City, NYCFC in the MLS, that group owns 8 teams in total around the world. Leicester, their ownership group, has full control of OH Leuven in Belgium. Brighton owner Tony Bloom owns USG in Belgium. Sheffield holds ties with Beerschot, the current leaders of the Jupiter League. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we see other top clubs or other owners who are very savvy and who are very ambitious going out and either, outright buying some of these teams in other leagues that they can farm and foster these players that are interesting prospects that wouldn't be allowed to come play for their academies, or at the same time seeing if they can come to these agreements where they're offering to put more money into these teams' pockets, if in terms they act as a independent and pseudo ghost developer and ghost academy for these other teams. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how that plays out, and it'll be interesting to see tactically how top clubs who currently don't have any affiliations move forward with their young prospect acquisitions and development. So that's it for that, and why don't we quickly talk about the U.S. women's national team settlement. Phil, why don't you give us a little bit of background on what happened there and, the relevance that this will have to women's football in general?
Yep, I'll go real quickly since we are running out of time. The U.S. women's national team, as many people know, have been fighting for equal pay and equal opportunity as the men's national team for quite some time now, and this past week they reached a settlement with the U.S. Soccer Federation, and it was interesting to say that nothing regarding pay or wages was settled on. It was more in terms of hotel accommodations, venues, and travel that was settled on. The U.S. women's national team will have the same treatment now in terms of hotels, travel. They will be having chartered flights now, as the U.S. men's national team have. U.S. women's national team has not have chartered flights. They've been flying on just normal business flights. And venues, they will be having much bigger venues as the U.S. men's national team has had in the United States. They will be playing matches now in Columbus, at the Rose Bowl, in Chicago, in these major locations where they can draw more supporters. In terms of pay, this could be a stepping stone to that. U.S. Soccer Federation's president, quote unquote, said that this is a great stepping stone and will lead to greater strides towards equality in the sport. Of course, meaning the U.S. side of it. The U.S. women's national team, of course, has been pulling for this for years, ever since in the last World Cup, France, who won the men's side, the men's French national team, stepped away from the World Cup with a prize winning of 38 million US dollars, and the US women's national team, after winning the Women's World Cup a year later, stepped away with $4 million in prize money. We'll have to see how things shape up going into the future.
Yeah, like you said, definitely huge steps forward in tightening that gap. At the same time, we'll see how things progress. We'll see how, if the U.S. women's national team can continue to be advocates, great advocates as they have been in moving forward and, combating this issue. So from there, why don't we jump quickly to last week's results and the must-watch matches of the following week. So let's quickly touch upon each of the matchups, our predictions, what our scores ended up being, and just a little bit of insight on that. Let's start with something that I don't want to talk about, but we'll end up talking about now, and we'll talk about next week more. Tottenham-Arsenal. Tottenham coming out with a 2-0 win. I predicted a 2-1 win for Arsenal. You predicted a 1-1 tie. It really was a Mourinho masterclass, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, Tottenham played the game well, counter-attacking. Arsenal couldn't quite finish. Simple as that. Easy win for Tottenham. Stay top of the table. Arsenal continue their woes. Like you said, we'll get more into it next weekend.
In Germany, Bayern versus RB Leipzig, we predicted a 3-3 draw. It played out to a 3-3 draw. I predicted a 4-0. You predicted a 5-0. I think, all in all, we really underestimated Leipzig and in their current form. It was really exciting for a 3-3 draw, but in hindsight, not a terribly unexpected scoreline for two strong sides.
And it shows the class of Bayern to be able to get back into this game and earn a point. RB Leipzig, of course, now emerging as easy favorites for the second position in the Bundesliga at the very least, being able to contend with Bayern up top, something that Dortmund and Leverkusen below them have not been able to do.
So from there, Juve Torino ended up playing out to a 2-1 win for Juventus. I predicted a 3-0. You predicted a 3-2. Again, a lot of issues. Juve showing that they're just not dominant as they have been.
Yeah, and it shows that, like I said beforehand last week, that Torino are starting to get desperate. They're going to have to start playing to win matches, and they did, and they nearly came away with a point against Juventus. Juventus have a lot of work to do to get back to what they were last season. However, they do get away with the 3 points, and a big 3 points at that.
So then on from there, Lille Monaco, we both predicted a Lille win. I said 3-2, you said 3-1. It was 2-1. Another strong showing for Lille.
Yeah, and Jonathan David getting on the scoreboard for Lille, and we've been waiting for him to really come to form. It looks like this might be the start of that.
Yeah, fingers crossed for him that he can continue that development and have the breakout season that we expected him to have after moving to Ligue 1. And then the last match of the week, Sevilla-Real Madrid, ended up Real Madrid winning 1-0. We had both predicted 2-1 Sevilla wins.
Yeah, and as much as I want to say that this was an undeserved win by Real Madrid, Sevilla dominating the ball for most of the game, Real Madrid winning on a counter that ended up being an own goal against Sevilla goalkeeper Bono. A win's a win, and Real Madrid needed those 3 points, especially after Cadiz ended up beating Barcelona in their fixture, putting more pressure on Real in fourth. Real Madrid hold that position for now.
So that's it for the matches of last week. Let's look ahead to the following week's matches, what we've deemed to be the must-watch matches of the week. We'll go over our scorelines quickly, give a brief breakdown like we had said. So first off, in the Champions League, Manchester United versus RB Leipzig. This match is looking, if Paris Saint-Germain win, like this will be a fight for second place. If United can secure a draw, they'll move through, assuming that PSG wins. If this match draws and PSG loses, United and Leipzig will both go through, and then whoever wins this match is guaranteed a spot moving forward. I predicted this to be a 2-2 draw. I can see United playing for the draw, knowing that that's going to guarantee them a spot in the next round regardless, and it just seems like a United-esque win to squeak through with that.
Yeah, and I predicted a 3-2 Leipzig victory. Despite Manchester United's class so far, the form that they're in, I think Leipzig have been also in great form as well, and I think they could get the victory and go through.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then another Champions League match, the first Messi versus Ronaldo of the season, Juve, Barcelona. This match is a home match for Juventus. We saw Barca come out with a 3-1 win at Camp Nou. I see this match, fingers crossed, and with Ronaldo back, Juventus, and I say fingers crossed again, being a Juventus fan, I see Juve coming out of this with a 2-1 win. Phil, where do you see the match going?
I could also see a 2-1 Juve victory. Barcelona have just straight up been in atrocious form, and even though Juventus are not up to par, they are still winning matches. I think Juventus will continue with another win. Barcelona in trouble.
So, our next match from La Liga, we see Atleti taking their position atop of La Liga this past weekend. They will be facing off against Real Madrid. Phil, Real Madrid getting back on form last week. Can you see them stopping the barreling truck that is Atleti through La Liga?
Absolutely not. And I predicted a 4-0 Atleti win, and here's why. Atleti just have been unstoppable in La Liga. They are in tremendous form. Luis Suarez and João Felix heading up the top line. Oblak playing like his normal self. I say 4-0. Real Madrid have not been up to par for me. An undeserving victory against Sevilla last week. They are going to be exposed this week.
Yeah, I stayed a bit more conservative with my predictions. I think Atleti's going to win. I can see them putting up a clean sheet, but I only predicted a 1-0 win for Atleti. On to the Manchester Derby, Manchester United, Manchester City. Phil, how do you see this playing out based off of your prediction of how United will fare against Leipzig?
So I think that United have been a different team in the Premier League, and despite not having Pogba seemingly in their lineup going forward, I think they could put together a victory against Manchester City by a score of 2-0. Manchester City still struggling to put up a fair bit of scoring in the Premier League. Gabriel Jesus hasn't really been able to put the ball in the back of the net. The main focus of their offense has been coming from the wings in Riyad Mahrez and Raheem Sterling. So if Manchester United are able to neutralize the wings coming forward, I think with Bruno Fernandes, Cavani, and Rashford staying on form, they could get a 2-0 victory.
Yeah, I think based off of my predictions, I have a feeling that United are going to find a way to squeak through Champions League, but then when it comes back to Premier League, I can see City being the team to put their good form to a halt. I predicted a Manchester City win by a scoreline of 3-1. And then off to a huge matchup in France, PSG, Lyon. Phil, how do you see this match going?
Lyon have played well. They've been in good form, but I think PSG are just too much for them. I think PSG will get more of a battle against Lille and Monaco going forward when they have to play them. I think Lyon haven't been exactly as strong as they need to be with Aouar still in the side. I think he'll provide a little spark for Lyon, but they'll need a lot more if they want to beat PSG at the moment. I say PSG 3, Lyon 1.
Yeah, I said 4-1 for PSG, but I have a feeling we might be overestimating. We'll see, but like you said, I think PSG have the potential to barrel through them. That's it for our must-watch matches of the week. Phil, that concludes episode 2. A great preview of the MLS Cup final. Definitely encourage anyone who's on the fence about it or has access to it to watch that matchup and see how that plays out. As for next week's podcast, we will be taking what will become sort of a little series for the podcast. We'll be looking at teams who are struggling or who have been struggling, as Arsenal have for the last 10 years and have been on a steady decline. We'll look at the situation down there, we'll break it down, and we'll give our opinions on how things can be turned around.
Yep, that's going to be an interesting podcast. Also, looking forward this week on Wednesday, we will be starting our Cleats First, Logic Second Premier League predictions game on our Instagram and Twitter. So be sure to follow us there at Cleats Then Logic on both. And remember, meat first, soccer second. Have a great week.